Usually, whenever I'm talking about Doctor Who, I like to keep politics out of it. Like, sometimes, yes, Doctor Who may have an underlying political message, but I think most of the time we just like to enjoy it. However, with the latest Big Finish story that I've listened to, it's kind of impossible to talk about this one without talking about politics a little. So, this won't be a full political video, but just there may be some politics in this Doctor Who review. Anyway, that being said, The Fearmonger, the fifth Big Finish story, released for audio, released in 4 parts on the 4th of February 2000. This is also the first Big Finish story to feature the 7th Doctor, voiced by Sylvester McCoy, and Ace, voiced by Sophie Aldred. That was actually the first time the two of them had gotten back together since Survival back in 1989. Now, the story takes place in London around the year 2002. And basically what it is there is two assassins named Stephen Keyser and Walter Jacobs, played by Mark Wright and Mark McDonnell, have been sent to assassinate Sherilyn Harper, the leader of the New Britannia political party, a far right-wing political party, and their leader, Sherilyn Harper, is voiced by Jacqueline Pearce. They end up failing. Stephen ends up going on the run, and Mark ends up in hospital. However, something's not quite right, as Mark begins to hear a mysterious creature, especially on news reports or news updates and the like. He ends up hearing it in the voice of Sherilyn Harper. Now, the Doctor and Ace end up coming to London, and they end up getting mixed up in all this. And it turns out they're on the trail of the Fearmonger, a parasitic, incorporeal creature that seemingly feeds on people's fear. Now, at first they believe, like Walter does, that it's taken over the body of Sherilyn. But as the story goes on, it becomes clear that things aren't quite as clear-cut as they think. Not only do they encounter the two gunmen, and Sherilyn Harper, but they also encounter a radio DJ named Mick Thompson, played by Vince Henderson, who's frankly loving the political climate and loves to kind of constantly comment on it, like, even if the Doctor doesn't entirely agree. Ace also ends up meeting up with an old friend of hers from Perivale named Paul Tanner, voiced by Jonathan Clarkson, and they also end up running into a PR for Harper named Roderick Allingham, voiced by Hugh Walters. And it turns out that the Fearmonger isn't the only thing that New Britannia has got on their hands, as they are also being targeted by a terrorist group called United Front, with their leader, Alexandra Karadzic, also somewhat being aware of the Fearmonger and trying to destroy it. But as the story goes on, it becomes less and less about politics and more about fear. And then a slight mix of the two, and an ending that I do actually think is somewhat rather brilliant in its commentary. Now, when I looked up other reviews of this particular story on YouTube, the one that I think I found the most useful was the classic one from Council of Geeks, which I will link down in the description if I remember to do so. But anyway, they said in that review that this story, while it was released like really early 2000s, like 4th of February 2000, it could have actually been made today or released today because the political climate, the message still does hold strong. Anyway, I do agree with that, especially with the ending. Now, if you haven't listened to the story yet, go off, listen to it, you'll see what I mean, and then come back, because the kind of big message at the end, I feel, is where this story, I think, really finishes out strong. Because it seems to Ace at the end of part 3 that the Fearmonger has now jumped over into the Doctor. Like, it was previous, they believed it was in Sherilyn Harper, but it's now jumped over to the Doctor. And at the very end of part 4, Ace, when they're sorting up loose ends, Ace manages to get the machinery together, and she attempts to force the creature out of the Doctor, only for the Doctor to tell her the creature isn't actually in him. she is hearing it. She thinks it's in him, but it's not. It's in her. Like, throughout the story, Walter was the one who was. Walter, the gunman, was the one who was hearing it. He was hearing it in Sharon Harper, he was hearing it in the Doctor, but the thing was, it wasn't in either of them, it was in him. And since Ace had gotten injured earlier in the story and ended up in hospital, the creature now had jumped over to her, and it was twisting things inside her mind. It was making her hear things making her hear other people as monstrous when in fact the monster wasn't in them. It was in her. It was feeding off her fear. It was making her afraid of these people who they were telling her they were just trying to help her, and just she was hearing them as monsters. And to be honest, I think that particular message, as I said, I don't like to address politics very often with Doctor Who, but I do think that's kind of brilliant. That with a lot of the political stuff these days, we can hear certain things and it sounds scary, and then other people can feed off that and make us hear things scarier than they sound. But then they can make stuff that really is perfectly ordinary, is needed for progress, sound scary. Thus, we lash out, we don't trust people, and honestly, I feel that's kind of brilliant. Just the Doctor Who would take this stance, going, "No, they're not saying scary things. We're just hearing them as such." And yeah, as I said, I think that's kind of brilliant that they took that stance and they made it work. Now, in terms of the casting of this one, I do like that Mark Wright actually got a role in Doctor Who. Like, I personally don't know him. I know he's an actor. I've never really seen some of his other stuff. The main thing I knew him for was a couple of years ago he did Strictly Come Dancing. But like Hayley Atwell, I am glad that he got a part in Doctor Who. Even if it was just in an audio drama, it's nice to hear him in there. So, yeah. I think listen to the Fearmonger for yourself. You might not pick up on the you might not pick up, or you might not need to pick up on the political messages in there, but have a listen for yourself and draw your own conclusions from it. Because I felt that this story, it had to lean quite heavily into the politics of the message that it had, but in doing so, it managed something that was, as I said, really, really good. Anyway, what will be my next Big Finish story? At this point, I don't know. I'll have to wait and see. Until next time, see ya.